Willow Tate smacked Lucas Jones on Tuesday, August 12, as Danny Morgan dealt with a kidnapping problem. Outback also found a new owner to go home with. So here's what happened on Tuesday's exciting GH episode. At the Quartermaine mansion, Danny anxiously told Jason Morgan that he had brought someone home with him. When Danny showed Jason that Scout Quartermaine was present, he admitted to bringing her back from camp because Scout asked him. Danny took off with Scout without telling anyone. So Jason recommended they call Drew. Scout did not want her father involved since he would force her to leave and constantly breaking his promises to allow her to visit the Q manse. Jason eventually called Alexis Davis, who was speaking with Marco Rios regarding Scout's custody predicament. Alexis raced over to meet Scout, who mentioned missing when she lived with Danny and Rocco Falconeri. Meanwhile, Danny defended himself to Jason, saying he didn't believe he had done anything wrong. Scout simply wanted to spend time with them in the house, so Danny saw no problem with that. At the Metro Court pool, Rocco attempted to assist Giovanni Gio Palmieri in finding Outback a new home. Liesl Albrecht arrived and gushed about the cute dog, which reminded her of one she once owned. Rocco recommended that Liesl adopt Outback, but Albrecht had to decline because she was living at the hotel. When Lulu Spencer saw Rocco with Liesl, she asked Carly Spencer for help kicking Albrecht out of her suite. Carly eventually made up a story about the room being hazardous due to mildew, but Liesl wasn't buying it and threatened to tell Rocco that Lulu orchestrated everything. Lulu confronted Rocco's request to adopt Outback because he couldn't find anybody else to take her in. Lulu initially protested, but she appeared to see this as an opportunity to regain Rocco's support, and she eventually agreed, much to his pleasure. Nearby, Emma Scorpio Drake chastised Anna Devane for canceling Professor Henry Hank Dalton's lecture. Anna was attempting to protect Emma from another lab break-in and an arrest on her record, which could jeopardize her future. Emma eventually revealed to Gio that she would not give up. The goal was to take a break for a few weeks and then resume her Dalton takedown efforts once Anna stopped monitoring Emma so carefully. Drew arrived at Gish seeking to speak with Willow, but she refused his assistance in reuniting her children. Lucas offered to assist Willow in getting rid of Drew, but she insisted on handling the situation herself. Drew received a phone call about Scout going missing from camp, but Willow dismissed any concerns as she sought to soothe him. Drew, on the other hand, felt compelled to contact the police. In private, Lucas acted as if Willow had gone too easy on Drew, and should have ended things right away. Lucas chastised Willow for being sad, claiming she acted like a Drew addict. Willow slapped Lucas across the face, which shocked him. Willow, too, seems taken aback by her own rash decision. Drew and Harrison Chase ultimately arrived at the Quartermaine estate, where Scout whined about having to leave before seeing Monica Quartermaine. Drew directed Scout to the car, and before ordering Chase to arrest Danny for kidnapping, he was seen leaving the camp with Scout. Danny, Jason, and Alexis were stunned when they learned the news. Jocelyn Jacks awoke late at the Five Poppies resort to find that Vaughn had ordered breakfast for them. Vaughn performed a show for the employee who delivered the room service by kissing Jocelyn. Jocelyn and Vaughn eventually decided to split up while carrying out their recon assignment. That gave Jocelyn time to dwell on the time she'd shared with Vaughn up to this point, and she was clearly falling for him. Meanwhile, Pascal was happy with Britt Westbourne's work in the lab, but he wasn't too pleased with her continual use of her phone. Britt couldn't help but look at the fresh photos of Rocco online. Vaughn approached Britt and chatted with her before she revealed that she was a resort resident and noticed his wedding ring. After Vaughn admitted he was a newlywed, he pretended his wife would be fine with their interaction and consented to put sunscreen on Britt's back. Jocelyn appeared nearby, gaping at the sight of an alive Britt seated right next to Vaughn. According to General Hospital spoilers, Jocelyn will have a lot of questions after seeing Britt, so stay back for more information on the mystery she will solve. According to General Hospital spoilers, Willow Tate's life has turned much darker since Drew Kane derailed it. She has been compared to her wicked sister, Nellie Benson, but is this fair? Nina Reeves did not raise her daughters, yet they look a lot like her. Let's unpack this complicated situation. JH lovers. Who is worse, Nellie or Willow? Before Nellie died, she caused a lot of harm in PC. She was responsible for Carly Spencer's visit to Ferncliff and Michael Corinthos believing Wiley Corinthos had died. Nellie was a ruthless and scrupulous person who relished in causing havoc. It may be claimed that Willow's behavior is nothing like that of her sister, but how about her attitude? Some supporters believe Weeping Willow overplays the victim card and stands on hallowed territory. Willow, for example, agreed to Drew Kane blackmailing Portia Robinson in order to portray Michael as a drug user and so unfit father. Weeping Willow is getting worse. Willow justifies terrible behavior because she wants her children back. She was also the one who pursued infant Daisy Gilmore. As a result, Sasha Gilmore and Corbin fled town for their own safety. Willow, like the rest of the community, is a typical cheater. Can any of this compare to Nellie's insane antics? Maybe if you regard Willow's sanctimoniousness as a sugar coating for her bad behavior. Nellie enjoyed being psycho despite everything else she was. Nellie was a psycho. Willow has gone through a lot. She was in a cult because of her mother, and she was forced to stay away from her children because of her affair with Drew. Willow's punishment is on the way. According to Explosive General Hospital spoilers. Who do you believe is the worst villain, Nellie or Willow? What should happen to Willow after all of her meanness? Lucas staggered back, his hand leaping to his cheek, where a red line had already appeared. For a brief moment his grin gave way to something darker, perhaps rage or shame. He rapidly recovered, straightening up and chuckling softly. You always did have a temper, Willow, he observed, his voice suave but mocking. But you are barking up the wrong tree. Willow's jaw clenched as she heard the untruth. I didn't touch your brother. She had heard the tales and pieced together the story based on murmurs in the saloon and uneasy stares from the townspeople. Danny, who was only 16 years old, was kidnapped 2 nights ago while camping along the river. The outlaws who abducted him were not strangers. They were the same group Lucas had been hanging out with for months, sharing information for money. Willow didn't have proof yet, but her gut told her Lucas was involved in this catastrophe. Her instincts were almost always correct. The square was still, and the crowd held its breath as Willow took another stride toward Lucas. Do you think you can fool everyone in this town? She stated, her voice low and menacing. I know, Lucas. I understand what you've been doing. And I swear, if Danny is wounded as a result of your actions, a slap will be the least of your worries. The threat hung thick and palpable between them. Lucas' eyes narrowed, but he did not answer. Instead, he tipped his hat, turned and walked away, his boots kicking up dust with each stride. The crowd parted for him, and their muttering resumed as he disappeared around the corner of the general store. Willow stood there, her chest heaving and her hands trembling from wrath. She ignored the glances and whispers. She only cared about locating Danny before it was too late. Across town, in a darkly lit room above the saloon, a new type of drama was playing out. The Outback, the town's only bar and the center of its social life, had recently changed hands. The previous owner, a grizzled guy named Amos who had run the property for 30 years, had sold it to a stranger from the city, a woman named Clara, who arrived with a bag full of cash and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The townspeople had no idea what to make of her. She was too polished for a location like the Outback, with her cut clothing and the way she spoke, like if she were reading from a book. But something about her, a calm firmness, made others hesitate before crossing her. Clara had wasted no time in taking over, redesigning the bar, employing new employees, and enforcing restrictions that had the regulars groaning. She vowed that there would be no more brawls, and no more credit for drinks. The old-timers disliked it, but Clara didn't seem to mind. She had grand ambitions for the Outback that no one in town could have imagined. Clara stood behind the bar, wiping the counter with a rag, her movements precise and meticulous. The saloon was quiet tonight, as the normal raucous crowd had thinned down due to Danny's kidnapping. People were afraid, and that made them cautious. Clara's sharp eyes surveyed the room, noticing the few customers nursing their drinks. She'd heard about Willow's encounter with Lucas in the square. News travels quickly in a tiny town like this, and she couldn't help but feel a spark of admiration for the young woman. Clara understood what it was like to battle for family, to stand up to someone who believed they could walk all over you. But she also recognized that Willow was in over her head. The criminals who had kidnapped Danny were more than just a ragtag group. They were organized, brutal, and supported by someone with huge pockets. Clara had her assumptions about who that person might be, but she wasn't ready to reveal her identity. Not yet. The air near the river, where Danny had last been seen, was dense with the fragrance of moist earth and rotting wood. The outlaws had set up camp in a concealed clearing, with their tents blending into the tree's shadows. Danny sat bound to a post, his wrists sore from straining with the ropes. He was terrified, but he wasn't going to let them see it. His freckled face was set in a hard scowl, and he kept his gaze fixed on the ground, refusing to meet the stare of the guy guarding him, a massive figure with a scar along his cheek. The outlaws were waiting for something, but Danny had no idea what. They'd been talking quietly about a ransom, about someone in town willing to pay a large sum of money to keep Danny alive. But as the hours passed, Danny's hope faded. He reflected on Willow, how she had always been there to protect him, even after their parents died and left them to fend for themselves. He wondered if she'd find him in time, or if he'd end up like the stories he'd heard of children who vanished into the desert and were never seen again. Willow wasn't wasting time once she arrived back in town. She'd spent the day looking for leads and speaking with anyone who could have information about the criminals. Most people clammed up when she mentioned Lucas, but she had a tip from a drunk at the saloon, a frightened man who said he saw Lucas meeting with a stranger near the old mill the night Danny was kidnapped. It wasn't much, but it was adequate to keep her going. She saddled her horse, Ember, a robust mare, and rode to the mill at dusk. The old structure was collapsing, its wooden beams drooping from the weight of years. Willow tied Ember to a tree and moved closer, her heart racing in her chest. She had no idea what she'd find, but she was prepared for anything, or so she thought. Inside the mill, Lucas was waiting. He knew Willow would come looking, and she would not let it go. He stood in the shadows, his fingers gripping his handgun. He didn't want to hurt her, but he was already in too deep. The criminals promised him a portion of the ransom, enough to get him out of the outback for good. All he had to do was keep Willow off the path. But as he watched her shape go through the doorway, hesitant but determined, he had a moment of doubt. Willow wasn't just anyone. She was the only one who had ever believed in him as a child, dreaming of a better life. He had betrayed that confidence, and now there was no turning back. The mill was dark with just moonlight filtering through the damaged roof. Willow's eyes slowly adjusted, searching the room for any sign of Lucas or the outlaws. When she heard a creak behind her, she whirled around and grabbed the knife from her belt. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice firm despite the anxiety gnawing at her. Lucas strode into the moonlight, his hands up but his posture relaxed, as if he were attempting to talk his way out of a bar brawl. "Easy, Willow," he said. "You don't want to do anything stupid." Her gaze hardened, and her grasp on the knife tightened. "Where is Danny?" she demanded. Lucas sighed and shook his head. "You won't discover him by chasing shadows. Go home, Willow. Let this go." But she didn't listen. She lunged forward, her knife gleaming in the faint light, and Lucas just escaped in time. The fight was fast and violent. Lucas was stronger, but Willow was faster thanks to her rage. She caught him off guard, knocking the gun out of his grip and trapping him against the wall. "Tell me where he is," she exclaimed, her blade pressing to his throat. Lucas appeared to be about to fight back for a moment, but then his shoulders fell and his stubbornness drained away. "There by the river," he explained quietly. "Around the old oak forest. Willow, you cannot take them alone. They'll kill you." She took a step back, her chest heaving, and looked at him. She wanted to despise him and hold him accountable for his actions, but all she could think of was Danny. Without further word, she turned and dashed for her horse, leaving Lucas in the dark. Clara was about to close the saloon for the night when she heard hoof beats. She came outside just in time to watch Willow ride out of town, her face set in resolve. Clara pushed her lips into a thin line. She'd been following Lucas for weeks, trying to piece together his connections to the criminals. She hadn't intended to get involved, but Willow's determination sparked something in her. She grabbed her coat and a weapon from behind the bar before heading for her own horse. The Outback was more than just a saloon to her. It was a stake in this community, an opportunity to start something fresh. And she wasn't going to let a bunch of outlaws destroy it. By the river, the criminals were becoming agitated. Their boss, a cold-eyed man named Vance, had just learned that Lucas had been compromised. He didn't trust the smooth-talking traitor, but he didn't expect Willow to act so quickly. He yelled commands to his soldiers, directing them to pack up camp and relocate Danny. Willow dashed into the clearing, her knife in one hand and a borrowed revolver in the other. The outlaws froze, taken aback by her sudden entrance. "Let him go," she yelled, her voice echoing over the crackle of the campfire. Vance gave a low, guttural laugh. "You're a long way from home, girl," he remarked, pulling his weapon. But before he could fire, a shot boomed out from the trees, knocking one of his guys to the ground. Clara moved into the clearing with her gun still burning. "Drop it," she urged, her voice calm yet forceful. Vance hesitated, his gaze flitting between Willow and Clara. He was not used to being outnumbered, particularly by two women. But the odds had changed and he knew it. With a curse, he threw his rifle down and raised his hands. Willow didn't wait. She dashed to Danny, severing his chains with her knife. He threw his arms around her, tears running down his cheeks. "I knew you'd come," he said. Willow clutched him close, her eyes stinging. "Always," she replied. The outlaws were apprehended by daybreak, due to Clara's quick thinking and a few well-placed threats. Lucas was nowhere to be found. He had slipped out of town during the tumult, leaving only whispers and bad blood. The townspeople gathered in the square once more, this time to thank Willow and Clara, who stood side by side, an unexpected duo pulled together by fate. The outback was safe, at least for the time being, and Clara's reputation as its new owner was solidified. She was no longer a stranger, she was one of them. Willow carried Danny home, assuring herself that she would never allow him out of her sight again. But deep inside she knew it wasn't the end. Lucas was still out there, and the desert was brimming with secrets waiting to be discovered. Willow had always been the embodiment of calm strength in Port Charles, a lady who endured tremendous loss and heartache while smiling through the storm. Her gentleness, generosity, and ability to forgive had won her a reputation as someone incapable of malice. However, in recent months that image began to crumble, showing shades of a person no one had imagined. People who had previously backed her at every turn were now doubting if her acts were motivated by love, desperation, or something far deeper. The murmurs intensified. Was Willow really any better than Nellie, the renowned troublemaker who had caused havoc on the Corinthos family's lives? Or as some have said, was she worse? At first, comparing the two women seemed almost ridiculous. Nellie had been a brilliant manipulator since the moment she walked into Port Charles, telling lies, orchestrating mishaps, and even putting people's lives in risk without batting an eye. She had wielded her charm like a weapon and her beauty like a trap. Nellie's betrayals were public and loud, difficult to overlook, and frequently inflicted scars on both reputations and hearts. Willow, on the other hand, remained quiet and deliberate. Her indiscretions, if you could call them that, were smaller and more subtle, but they had recently begun to have just as much influence. Willow's actions weren't always obvious mistakes on the surface. She justified them with noble intentions, portraying them as necessary to protect her family or children. However, as time passed, these arguments began to feel like excuses. For example, her recent fights with Michael revealed a new side to her personality. Michael had always admired her kind demeanor and strong dedication, but that loyalty appeared to be turning toward a new sort of allegiance, one to herself. She began making decisions regarding their children without involving him and dismissed his worries with a stern, even contemptuous tone. She spoke about them with a possessiveness, as if she alone could choose their future. This wasn't the loving Willow people knew. This was a woman who was willing to go to any length to achieve her goals. Willow's involvement in a crisis involving Nina proved to be a watershed moment for many. Her hostility toward her biological mother had solidified into something icy and immovable. While many recognized the reasons, Nina's previous conduct toward her had been nasty and manipulative. Willow's inability to let go of her bitterness began to resemble the behavior she loathed in others. Instead of choosing the high way, she dug into her bitterness, stifling any prospect of reconciliation and shutting Nina off from real interaction with her grandchildren. In doing so, she was not only punishing Nina, but also her own children, robbing them of a relationship that might one day be important to them. It was the type of personal vendetta that Nellie herself would have enjoyed. Nellie, for all her flaws, had been open about her plans. She did not conceal her ambition or willingness to cross the line. Willow's ways were more sinister, disguised as selflessness. That was what bothered people the most. The notion that her morals was now malleable, molded to meet her personal wants. She wasn't openly lying, but she had such tight control over the narrative that no one else's point of view could get through. It was control disguised as caring, and for some, that was more harmful than Nellie's outright evil. Her friends started noting the changes too. Sasha, her closest confidant, had begun to withdraw slightly. It wasn't because she didn't like Willow, but because she sensed an undercurrent of judgment in her remarks lately. Willow was once infinitely compassionate, always prepared to see all sides of a problem. She now appeared to be eager to take sides, her own, without thinking about how it would look or who it could affect. Sasha could only wonder if this was the result of everything Willow had been through, or if it was a part of her that had always existed, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Even Carly, who had previously championed Willow and supported her against criticism, was beginning to detect holes in the image she had helped to build. Carly had spent years at odds with Nellie, so she recognized the characteristics of someone developing manipulative tendencies. While Willow wasn't yet planning sophisticated takedowns or plotting legal traps, she was beginning to take methodical steps to satisfy her own emotional vendettas. Carly couldn't determine whether to approach her or give her space, but an awful sensation in her gut persisted. Michael's presence only exacerbated the problem. He appeared split between upholding Willow's decisions and silently criticizing them. He genuinely loved her, yet love did not blind him. He'd grown up amid deception, secrets, and power plays. His own family had taught him a lot about it, and he was beginning to notice a pattern in Willow's recent behavior. He didn't want to believe she could continue down the same path as Nellie, but he couldn't deny that her decisions were causing friction between them, which only seemed to be increasing. Willow hadn't become a villain overnight. In many respects, she remained the same woman who had risked all for those she loved. But the more she clung to control, the more she appeared eager to break the rules to maintain it. In Port Charles, once you start crossing tiny lines, the major ones are never far away. People questioned if she recognized how close she was to losing the very thing she was working so hard to protect, her family. If she continued to tighten her grip, she risked pushing them away completely. Following a dispute at the Quartermain mansion, analogies to Nellie grew more difficult to reject. It was supposed to be a simple chat about the children's schedules, but it quickly evolved into a furious confrontation in which Willow accused Michael of allowing extraneous forces, such as Nina, to damage their family. She talked with a determination that left no space for compromise, and in that moment, she appeared every bit as unyielding as Nellie had been during her worst days. The difference was that Nellie would have rejoiced in the turmoil she created, whereas Willow seemed to believe she was the victim. That mindset, viewing herself as completely justified, was what made her dangerous in a different way. Some Port Charles people began to speculate that the experience had permanently altered her. Willow had been through too much loss. Her child health scares, her mother's betrayals, and the ongoing tug-of-war between loyalty to Michael and personal boundaries. Perhaps they reasoned this was just the natural hardening of someone who has been hurt so many times. But some were less compassionate. They viewed her behaviors as choices rather than reactions, and they believed she was old and wise enough to know better. In reality, Willow's demise was not about becoming Nellie, but about losing herself. Nellie had always been unabashedly selfish and merciless. Willow, on the other hand, had based her entire identity on being the polar opposite. If that identity crumbled, she would find herself in peril, navigating moral dilemmas without the compass she had relied on for years. Without that compass, she could easily end up making decisions she never envisaged for herself. The tragedy of it all was that some people continued to believe in her. They saw glimmers of her previous compassion and thought it could be restored. They believed she could pull back from the brink, rebuild the bridges she had burned, and demonstrate that she was still the woman Michael had fallen in love with. But every time she doubled down on her decisions, every time she ignored an opposing viewpoint, she got closer to the person everyone said she could never be. The question of whether Willow was genuinely worse than Nellie could be debated, but the truth was that the comparison was already a defeat for her. Being referenced in the same phrase as the woman who had spent years harassing Michael's family demonstrated how far she had fallen from her once impeccable image. If she didn't see it right away, she may wake up one day to discover that she had transformed into someone completely different, someone the people of Port Charles would no longer trust. And in this community, if you lost faith, it was nearly impossible to regain it. Willow's actions would eventually determine her fate. She had two options: walk away from the shadow Nellie had cast over the town and recover her own story, or continue down a path that would lead to comparisons she'd never be able to escape. The choice was hers, but time was running out, and in Port Charles even the best intentions may lead to disaster. The lady who had formerly been the heart of quiet strength now stood on the edge of a moral precipice, and no one knew which way she would fall.